It was about time that a power ranking show did some power rankings.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Locked On NHL. My name is Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers. That is Hunter Hodies, one of the hosts of Locked On Penguins. I want to thank everybody who makes Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Now that the playoffs are over, sports are not sportsing like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today's episode, very straightforward, going back to the traditional power rankings format. Now that we've got the dust settled and we've got a general idea about who's going to be playing where next year, there are definitely some moves still to be made. There's some interesting, maybe project free agents available. We've broken today's episode up into three segments. The first segment, we're going to talk about teams where they're either straight up rebuilding or we're not sure what category to put them in. The second tier of teams is going to be bubble teams that could be on the outside looking in or could very well make the playoffs. And then the final segment, we're going to touch on the real Stanley Cup contenders. So getting to work, opening up my handy dandy note sheet here. In this rebuilding tier, I think unequivocally, you have San Jose, you have Anaheim, you have the Blackhawks, you have the Blue Jackets, you have Montreal, and you have the Flames. I think those are unequivocally rebuilding teams. If you want to say Utah, maybe. If you want to say St. Louis, maybe. But for the most part, I would say that bottom crop, which is basically the same bottom crop as the last few years, but you're adding the Flames to it now.
If I had to maybe include one more, Nick, I know they were in the race this past year, but the Philadelphia Flyers have said that this is a rebuild that they've been doing under Danny Briere. They were ahead of schedule this past season. So I think maybe if you do want to include them in that tier, I think you can, even though, again, I do think they're going to try and be in the race again this year with Michkov and all that. But just wanted to throw it out there as well, just because they've legitimately said under the Briere regime that they are a rebuilding team.
That's very fair. I think the Flyers will be competitive in a way that some of the teams we just mentioned, like San Jose, like Anaheim, Chicago, the Blue Jackets, they're just not capable of doing that yet. So I think the Flyers are kind of in their own little box where they're good enough, or at least play well enough, that they're not going to be an atrocity. You know, they're not going to stink up the joint. They're not going to have 18 regular season wins by the end of the year like a team might be. The only way out for some of these teams like Chicago, Columbus, Anaheim, San Jose, Montreal, the only way out of this self-inflicted rebuilding window is if something pops. If something unexpected happens, you know, if for the Blue Jackets, for instance, have Adam Fantilli have like an 80-point season out of nowhere, that is something that could get them going. If the Canadians and their 9 prospect defensemen find the right permutation of 6, they very well could be a quality competitive hockey team. Like, I think there's a world where Montreal is capable of being close to what the Flyers were last year, though it would be more about their defense and Montembeault taking a step forward.
Or if Slavkovsky takes another big step next year as well, you know, Nick, maybe he's over a point per game player and maybe he exceeds expectations even more as an 85, 90 point player. I think that would also qualify for Montreal, especially after they gave him that big extension.
Completely agree with you there. For Anaheim, I think it's a matter of staying healthy, and I don't want to put all of it on John Gibson, but it does kind of feel like if the Ducks are going to find a way to hang around with as bad as their defense is, their forward group is decent. It's not bad. They had injury problems They had really rough injury problems last year. No Zegras for pretty much the entire season. Mason McTavish missed a lot of time. They were easing in Leo Carlsson, but I think the Ducks are kind of in a different boat, and I think the Ducks and the Sharks are in the same exact boat of you have like 3 or 4 young players that I really like, but other than that, there's not a whole lot here to convince me you have a high ceiling.
Right. I mean, in the Ducks, they had a really good start to the season a couple of years ago where
2 years ago, yeah.
You know, they were saying, oh, the rebuild's over, you know, we're going to go out here and, you know, exceed expectations even more, make the playoffs. But then they kind of came back to reality after the first month and a half, 2 months of the season, and they just went on a couple of really bad losing streaks. So they need to amass, you know, some more talent overall on that team. The Gibson situation, it continues to be weird, Nick. I mean, I still feel like they need to deal him so they can give Lucas Dostal some more starts. I actually like the way Dostal played this past year. I think he actually outplayed Gibson, to be honest. But just when you look at Gibson's contract, I'm just not really sure what team is going to want it right now. But we've been kind of saying that for the last couple of years too, just because he's been involved in so many trade rumors. But I think playing behind that defense for another year, I don't know, man. I get nervous just because of how far he's already fallen these last couple of years, and I don't want him to fall even more, even though the Ducks have not really made too many improvements to their defense.
I think Chicago has an argument for being a little more competitive this year. I don't think they're going to be close enough to the bubble where I could put them in that next tier.
They added some good talent in July 1.
Anytime you can add two top six caliber players in Bertuzzi and Teravainen, that's solid. And they added an NHL caliber goalie, which is the first time they've had one of those in a while. I mean, Brossoit isn't a 50-game starter, but he can give you 30 starts at a reasonably high level, and in tandem with Peter Mrazek, who in theory, with a reduced workload, should be able to be a little bit more effective. I could see the Blackhawks being frisky. I don't think they can be good, but I think they can score some goals. They won't be able to play defense particularly well, but they will be entertaining to watch. And then the next group, Seattle, Washington, St. Louis, Calgary, I also have in this mix of they're either rebuilding or I'm not really sure. Seattle spent a lot of money this summer, and these aren't impact guys. You know, it would be one thing if you went out and you overpaid and you got Marchessault or you got Stamkos. I like Brandon Montour. Montour's a 3 on a good team. Montour is a 3 on a good team, as in third defenseman. You know, first pair has 2 guys. He's the best guy on your second pair. I don't think he's a first pair guy on a good team. I think like similar to his usage in Florida last year, where they finally broke through and won the Stanley Cup because they got the right complementary partner for him. Chandler Stevenson is fine, but he's not a play driver, and he's not going to dramatically improve the outlook of your team. Calgary, very clearly going to take a step back. Even if it's just the goaltending alone, they're going to take a step back, going from Markstrom, who is on the periphery of being a Vezina caliber goalie, to going in with Vladar and Dustin Wolf, who combined have less than 100 NHL starts. And then St. Louis and Washington, same kind of deal. Older, expensive, not particularly good. Sure, there's probably a way where they can be in the mix for playoff spots, but I don't think they have high ceilings either way.
Right. And I think with Seattle, just to go back to you a little bit there, I would agree like Steven said. Montour, yeah, I do think on an elite team, he's a number 3, but I do think that he is very much an impact defenseman. He's very good with the puck on his stick, has a great shot. He can play well in his own zone. So I guess I kind of push back a little bit because I do think he's very much an impact player overall. I agree with your other teams. If I do want to add one more to this, I would add Pittsburgh. They have not officially said that they're doing a rebuild on the fly, but they are. I mean, just look at the picks they're getting, the trades they're making, the signings they're making. This is very much a mini rebuild on the fly, a big retool, if you will. I would put Pittsburgh in this category as well, but I could also see people putting them in the bubble category because some people may expect them to make the playoffs this upcoming year. So again, agree with your overall teams here, but if I had to add one, I would probably add Pittsburgh just because of the direction that Kyle Dubas is taking them.
I think Pittsburgh is talented enough where they won't be this bad. That's the thing. I don't think they're bottom 10 bad. I think they're very much in that middle where they're going to be somewhere between 12th and 17th, where I could see them being one of the 2 wild cards if things break right for them, if the teams around them aren't that good. I could definitely see that being in the cards for them. But that's fair. I think that's a reasonable estimation. Hunter and I are going to take a quick break, and then we're going to take some time and we're going to talk about the bubble team. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On NHL. We are all driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every single day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. So the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/locked on. Just go to Indeed.com/locked on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/locked on. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Thank you to everybody who's hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL with Hunter and I. So, in this middle tier, I could see these teams going either way. I could see them playing themselves, almost all of these teams playing themselves into a playoff spot, maybe able to win a round or so, or the opposite end of things, like we were just talking about in respect to the Penguins who are in this group of, I could see them being like the 12th worst team in the NHL, or I could see them being a playoff spot. So in this group, I have Pittsburgh, I have the Flyers, I have the Islanders, I have the Red Wings, I have the Senators, the Wild, the Jets, the Kings, the Lightning, the Bruins, the Predators, the Hurricanes, and the Canucks. I think this is your middle class. And some of these teams are closer to the top. You know, I think you could say Vancouver, Winnipeg, Carolina are close to the top of this group, close to that contender tier.
As one of the contenders, I think. Even though
I want to see it 2 years in a row. That's the thing. I want to see it 2 years in a row because I think Vancouver has the talent for sure, but they also had the talent 2 years ago, and then Thatcher Demko got hurt, and the bottom fell out, and they threw poor Bruce Boudreau under the bus because they didn't have an NHL caliber goalie. So I want to see it 2 years in a row. I definitely think the Canucks will be a contender because their high-end talent is so good, even if I don't necessarily understand some of the moves they made, bringing in Desharnais and re-bringing in Tyler Myers. And I see what they're trying to do, but I don't think it's going to make a lot of sense. But there's a really thick middle class of teams. There are a lot of teams in this group, like Carolina, Boston, Nashville, Vancouver, Winnipeg, that very easily could play themselves into the contender tier. There are teams like Ottawa that we've been waiting for them to break through. There are teams like the Islanders, the Flyers, the Penguins, Detroit, who are right there, but they're not really impressive. So it's going to be a very meh road to getting to the playoffs.
I think so. I know you had Washington in the tier below. I would actually move Washington up to this tier. Fair. I think just because they made the playoffs this past year. I really like the moves that the Capitals made on July 1 and even before, some of the trades they made, some of the signings overall. And I do think they're going to be very much in contention for a playoff spot again this year. They're at least trying to go out with a little bit of a bang before Ovechkin retires after these next couple of seasons are up. So I would put Washington in here overall. I did notice you are saving the Devils, I think, for the final category. I would have New Jersey in this category for now. Don't get me wrong. I think New Jersey is going to make the playoffs this year. I'm not sold on them as a bona fide contender just yet. They have the star forwards, obviously, Hischier, Hughes, etc. You have Dougie Hamilton coming back. They finally solved the goaltending problem, hopefully. You have Sheldon Keefe as head coach, who is at least an upgrade over Lindy Ruff, but I would not have them in the contenders category. I would have them down here. The other teams, I think I agree with. If I wanted to be maybe a bit nitpicky, I would maybe move, LA a little further down the list just because I'm not really sure where the plan is with Rob Blake right now with some of the moves that he's been making. Minnesota, I think, is kind of fair with this one. Carolina, you can make an argument for being a contender, but I'm also at the point where I want to see it before I can truly believe it when it comes to the Hurricanes. So those are just my overall thoughts. I already gave my thoughts about the Penguins. They're kind of in that middle where you can make a case for them in the bottom category with some of the moves, but you can also make a case for them in this category, especially with their high-end talent, mostly still producing really nicely overall.
Yes, for sure in that boat. And then there are teams like Minnesota, Winnipeg. I would say the Lightning are in that boat as well, where I think they have enough high-end talent where they very easily can be playoff teams, but I don't really believe in the depth, and I think their path is a little bit narrower than it may have been in years past. Like, objectively, trading out Stamkos for Gensel and bringing in McDonough to replace whoever the third D was last year, that's fine. I don't think Tampa Bay is going to be able to get to that ceiling anymore just because they're pretty much capped out. I think Minnesota is kind of in the same boat where they're pretty much capped out and can't improve their team all that much. And Winnipeg, they had their perfect season last year. Everything that could go right for the Jets last year did, and they were eliminated in 5 games in the first round, and they lost Dylan DeMello, they lost Brendan Dillon, they lost Tyler Toffoli, they lost Sean Monahan. It's going to be really hard for the Jets to be in that contenders tier again without multiple additions in season like they had last year. And maybe it's Rutger McGrody, maybe it's Ville Heinola, maybe it's somebody who's in-house because the Jets have slow played so many of their guys. Maybe there's a path to getting those guys. Maybe Brad Lambert, maybe 2 of those 3 prospect forwards come in and are able to make an impact and mitigate the losses of a Toffoli and a Sean Monahan. But based on the way the Jets have used young players historically since going back to Winnipeg, I struggle to imagine those guys are going to get big responsibility right away to be in a position to really bolster the team.
We still have to see if Rutger McGrody is even going to be in the Jets organization by the time the season starts. There's been so many rumors about him being involved in trade talks. Heck, that deal was supposed to be done around the NHL draft, and then it kind of fizzled out, and really haven't heard anything about it since. And now all the GMs are basically on vacation as we're in mid-July right now anyway. But I agree with you on Winnipeg. Connor Hellebuyck, he's going to have a god tier season once again. They're going to have to get great production once again out of Ehlers, out of Connor, out of Morrissey, etc. And I'm just not fully sure if all of that is going to happen like it did this past season again for the Jets. I agree with you, on Minnesota. Already discussed LA. These middling teams, it's going to be really interesting to see if any one of these can be bona fide contenders. If I had to maybe pick 1 or 2 that could, Tampa Bay, I would throw Tampa Bay in there just because of their amazing top line. Vasilevsky is still a top 5 goalie in the league, even though there's a lot of miles on him. Yeah, their depth isn't that good, but I still feel like when I look at the division right now, they're top 3 overall. And I also, yes, they did lose Sergachev. That's not good, but I still feel like they're at least going to make the playoffs and they can win a round, if not 2, if they do get the right matchup overall. I feel the same about Boston. They improved their center depth. They do have Jeremy Swayman, who had another great year last year. It's going to be interesting to see how he is as the full-fledged starter now, but they'll have at least a shot of being a contender if more things are going right for them during the season.
And then real quick, I know a lot of people are very excited about Nashville being that they spent a lot of money. I still don't think that team is particularly good. That's kind of the conundrum here. Like, yes, it's unequivocally better adding Marchessault, Stamkos, and Brady Shea, but Brady Shea was a 3 on a Carolina team where his partner was more impactful defensively than him. He's not going to have the luxury of having a Brett Pesce to cover up for his defensive mistakes. He's not going to be on a dominant possession team where he's not going to be able to get some of his deficiencies masked. And Stamkos is, I don't want to call him a power play specialist at this point because that's a little disrespectful, but a majority of his production is going to come from the power play. And Marchessault is 34 years old and undersized. And I know he just had the first 40-goal season of his career this past year, but I'm inclined to believe that was more of an outlier, perfect storm type situation than some type of mid-30s fountain of youth, Joe Pavelski type deal. I think Nashville will probably be better in the regular season. They were in the middle of a really rough stretch there, and then they rallied really crazy there from February through early April and kind of saved their season, played their way into the playoffs. The Predators will be a fun team, but I just don't think they're enough to be in that next tier. And then real quick,
Nashville, they're the 3rd best team, I think, in their division.
Yes.
I don't know if they can beat Colorado or Dallas in a 7-game series if both of those teams are healthy, but they're definitely a bona fide playoff team. Yes. I'm just not sure they're going to get the right matchup in the playoffs for them to go on a deep run. And just real quick as well, I wanted to discuss them just for 15 seconds. Buffalo is in this category. It's put up or shut up time for them, Nick. We got to see.
Kevin Adams, you are on the clock.
Yes, you very much are. If they don't do it this year, and I mean break that very long playoff drought, you're going to see a boatload of changes both on and off the ice. It's time for Buffalo to show me something this year.
Them and Ottawa, man. I know Ottawa just kind of started over too, new GM, new coach, but same kind of deal with Buffalo. I mean, if you fire Kevin Adams after this year, you're really going to tell me the new GM wants Lindy Ruff as his coach? I mean, it's just a really weird confluence of situation. And then real quick on the Devils. I think the Devils have everything lined up for them to be in the next tier. So we're going to talk about them in a second. But I do understand the skepticism where they're kind of similar to Carolina in the respect of they always have good underlying numbers, but eventually you do need to turn those expected goals into actual goals. Speaking of the Devils, we will address them and a few more teams coming up next. So be sure to stick around. I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports are not sportsing like we want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. If you were curious and you opened up the FanDuel Sportsbook right now, the betting favorite to win the Stanley Cup are the Edmonton Oilers at plus 850. If you think the Panthers are going to go back-to-back, plus 950. If you think Hunter's Penguins are coming back from the dead, you can get the Penguins at plus 5,000. There are a whole lot of interesting teams. The Devils, who we're about to talk about, are plus 1,100. So there's a whole lot to look forward to with hockey not too far in the future. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you to everybody who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. So, the contender class, I have the Devils, I have the Leafs, the Rangers, the Golden Knights, the Panthers, the Dallas Stars, the Avalanche, and the Oilers.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fair. Again, I would move New Jersey down to the other category, just because I want to see it to believe it. I think they're a bona fide playoff team. Not sure on them as a contender just yet, as I said a few minutes ago. The Rangers are interesting to me heading into this year. You know, they lose in the Eastern Conference Final. Nick, I know you wrote a very long piece for your Substack right after their season ended about how they need to make a lot of changes to their defense. Well, Nick, as of right now, I think they're just going to be bringing back that same defensive group, and that kind of scares me just overall. I think the Rangers are going to be a very good team this year, but I don't think they're going to be President's Trophy level good, and I'm kind of at the point with the Rangers where I need to see that they can beat the elite teams in the playoffs before I pick them to do it. You know, like a team like the Florida Panthers, for example. And they need some more of their stars, I think, to show up when the lights get the brightest. You know, obviously, Kreider had his moment against the Hurricanes, but, need Mika Zibanejad to show up at times in the playoffs. Artemi Panarin has long spurts. And I know it's small sample sizes. I get it, people, but this has been, I think a trend, for a couple of years now with that Rangers score. So I'm curious to see how that team in particular is this year. Bonafide playoff team. They'll be top 2 to 3 in the Metro, but are they a true contender? I want to see it before I can believe it a little bit, I guess, too.
The spin zone's already started. I'm going to quote you from The Athletic yesterday. According to a league source, there's at least been one conversation between Chris Drury and Jacob Trouba in the last few weeks. And while there was surely fence mending on the team's part for the rumors that were out there, Trouba's a pro, and he knows how to handle situations for the good of the team without letting his own emotions get in the way. Okay, I mean, nothing about his ability as a hockey player, but I'm glad everyone likes him. Swapping out Gustafsson for Zach Jones, that's definitely something to keep an eye on. I like Riley Smith for what he is, but don't think he's meaningfully making Mika Zibanejad or Chris Kreider that much better. Is he better than Blake Wheeler or Capo Caco? Sure. But is he that much better? I don't think so. Vegas, they've got a few actual question marks in their lineup for the first time in a few years, going into the year with Alex Holtz and Victor Olofsson penciled in to their top 9. That's a real question mark. And I like Olofsson based on the season he had in Buffalo 4 years ago, where he had 28 goals playing with Eichel. So I kind of see it. I think Florida, the only argument against them is it's really hard to go back to back, and they did lose some talent. Edmonton, I think, has the best forward group on paper, at least to start this season. I think Dallas is right there with them as far as most talented forward group. And then Colorado, they've got the two of the 5-6 best players in the world. That's the argument for them. I think the Leafs are kind of at their inflection breaking point where they're too good to be in the tier below, because if it clicks, it's obviously going to be very good. But based on 1967, what is that, 50 something years ago, it's hard to believe they're going to be able to do it again. So there's a lot to chew on in this segment, but I think this is a strong group And I think all of these teams, other than the Devils, at least who I have in this group, and maybe Edmonton, probably got worse, in all honesty. Dallas loses Pavelski, the Panthers lose Montour and Tarasenko, the Golden Knights, they lose Marchessault, the Rangers lose a couple depth guys, the Leafs are going to lost a couple depth guys. Other than the Devils, and then Colorado obviously losing to Chushkin, these teams all kind of had a brain drain.
Yeah, and in Colorado's case, we do have to keep saying they're hoping to get Landeskog back for the start of the season. At least that's their goal. And if he does come back and at least plays relatively well, I think that improves their ceiling overall too. I think with Vegas, they're definitely worse heading into next season, but that core they have in place is still so damn good. And I'll keep saying it on the show. I don't think they're done yet. I think they're working on something in the shadows. That is how Vegas operates. They always have a big move coming. I think they're going to do something big before the season starts just because.
Marner.
Yeah.
Marner.
It would scream Vegas to me when it comes to that. So we all know how their owner is. He hates losing. He does not like it at all. I know every team is like that, but especially Vegas. They were probably very pissed off the way they lost that series in the first round. I think they're going to have something to prove this upcoming season, where I discussed New Jersey. Toronto, I'm kind of in the same category, Nick. I'll believe it when I see it when it comes to this team. You've won one playoff series in this core four era. It's time to do something more than that.
They've won one playoff series since 2004.
Yeah.
We're going on 20 years. They've won one playoff series. And it's not for a lack of good teams. They've had some good teams, and they just have not gotten the right bounces. And when you go to 7 games against a good defensive team like the Bruins, those bounces aren't usually going to go your way. Real quick, Oilers and Dallas. I think the argument for Dallas is their defense is a little bit better and their goaltender is better. The argument for the Oilers is their forward group is better and they can get by only playing 1.5 defensive pairs. Whichever one of those teams you prefer, I think tells me a lot about what you value, especially based on how they went head to head in the conference final and what ended up being the determining factor. And we've generally seen that the high-end talent wins that time of year. The elite players are what separates the good from the great. And McDavid had a really good conference final. Draisaitl played injured, not nearly as much as you needed from him. There's a real argument if you got a little more out of Draisaitl, they probably win the Stanley Cup, in all honesty. But I feel like Dallas and Edmonton are the two best teams going into the season, at least on paper. And we'll see. That's why we play the games. But at least to start, I have Edmonton first. I have Dallas second in my overall power rankings for the entire league.
That's fair. I think with Edmonton, this is the best, forward group they've had of the McDavid Draisaitl era. I love the Jeff Skinner move. I think he can have a big bounce back with Oilers. Very cheap contract, very low risk as well. You put him in a top 6, middle 6 role. Really nice job there. Victor Arvidsson, I think that's also a really nice move by the Oilers. And also, I think Jeff Jackson should just be the full-time GM at this point with the moves that he was making after the season ended. He's been done a really solid job with the Oilers. Arvidsson can also play in your top 6 and your middle 6. I like that. Dallas, yeah, they lost Pavelski. Yeah, they lost Tanev, but I still think this is a very deep team overall. They have a lot of very high impact forwards. Obviously, not at the level that Edmonton has with McDavid, Draisaitl, Hyman, Nugent-Hopkins, but, Roope Hintz, Jason Robertson, Tyler Seguin, Jamie Benn, we can go down the list, as well. But I think when I look at the West right now, my top 3 teams to start the year in no order: Edmonton, Dallas, Colorado. I think those are my top 3 teams in the Western Conference. You can interchange them any way you want. And I'll throw Vegas probably at number 4 just for...
Real quick, give me your top 3 in the East.
Top 3 in the East, I'm going to go Florida, the Rangers, and I will go the Devils for number 3. I still need to see it before I can believe it, but I will go New Jersey number 3 right now with the moves they made and just how healthy they are heading into the season right now.
I think that's fair. I would agree with both of those top 3s. I think Vegas very easily can play themselves into top 3 in the West. That'll do it for this week's edition of the Locked On NHL Power Rankings. Make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple or Spotify, please throw the show a 5-star review. If you are watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell so you get a notification whenever a new episode goes live. Give us your power rankings. Let us know who you think the top 5 teams are going into this upcoming season. You leave a funny comment, we'll read it next week. Hunter and I will talk to you guys then.